So my crucible experience, very similar, started at a very young age in observing my parents. My mom was probably the most giving person on the planet. Still think she's one of the most giving people in the world, except when it came to my dad. And my example of marriage was my mom belittling my dad all the time, yelling, screaming at him, to the point that he retreated in the basement and drank for most of the time. So fortunately, they were able to work through their relationship issues and actually lived together and married together until they both died within 4 months of each other about 6 years ago. And I think my dad died of heartache. Anyways, that was my example of marriage growing up. And so I vowed when I got married that I wouldn't do what my dad did, and instead marriage would be 100% my responsibility. If it succeeded or failed, it was my responsibility. And so at a very young age, I learned to lie, right? And so because to me, I wanted other people to feel good, similar to the way my mom always wanted other people to feel good. And so I told these, and not major lies, but always these little micro truths or micro lies to people to make them feel better, which ultimately helped me feel better, because if I told them what they liked, then they would like me, and it would make me feel good about myself. And so that's the way I was oriented. So going into childhood and then getting married at a very young age, I got married at 22 years old. And I was a very good kid growing up, right? No drugs, no alcohol, no sex. I was the guy that every mom, every dad wanted to marry their daughter. I was just good, and so and by the way, that's not a lie. That's not a lie. So then I got married at a very young age, and went into this marriage recognizing or feeling that it was 100% my responsibility. And so with that, over time, obviously, you can't sustain that of trying to do everything. And that manifested itself through, doing everything, trying to, like, I was the person that cleaned up the house. I did absolutely, well, not absolutely everything, but I did a lot of stuff to really work hard on this. And over time, it started to take toll on my life and then it started to come out in destructive behavior. Destructive behavior in terms of working too hard at a point, drinking really quite a lot at a point, and doing a number of different things in terms of destructive behavior until eventually my marriage ended 3 years ago. And so my crucible experience was my observation of my parents, and then the trauma of a divorce. That's always two people's fault, but really was really a search for me finally becoming an authentic man and truly being authentic and wanting to be real with those people around me. So that's a little bit about my journey.
It's great, wonderful. We're going to talk about authenticity and what that looks like. Yeah, Julius.
It's really interesting, but I just had to say one thing. We were deriding and denigrating people who wear ties and suits earlier, so I actually think I make this look good. But we are in the Silicon Valley, and I work for Genentech, and everybody's business casual. You work all of your life to wear a suit, and now I'm going to work dressed in jeans like I'm a plumber or somebody building a house. So, but in any event, there wasn't one crucible moment. I grew up in the Southeast, so I was born in Nashville. I spent a lot of my childhood in Montgomery, Alabama, and Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And Montgomery was sort of a city, as I was growing up, of just cognitive dissonance. That there were these two high schools where the black population went to school. Robert E. Lee and Jeff Davis were the two high schools where all of the white kids went to school, and George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington were the two predominantly black high schools. And now I went back recently, and as the city's demographics have shifted and whites have sort of moved out, the Robert E. Lee and Jeff Davis schools are now predominantly black. But Robert E. Lee's probably spinning in his grave right now. And then when I went to Morehouse College, a famous historically black college in Atlanta, and after graduating was an officer in the Navy and was traveling all around the world, so I was in the Philippines and and where we had a huge base at the time, Singapore, Japan, Panama, any of these places I went to, there was always something that I could see that just didn't make sense, that there was a really wealthy ruling group of people, and then everybody else was in dire poverty. Women were treated unequally in some, even in Japan today, women are sort of considered subservient to men, and other cultures that I was being exposed to. There was always something that just seemed to be, I said, doesn't anybody recognize that this doesn't make sense? So as I moved into my professional career and eventually ended up in doing more and more work in the diversity and inclusion space, it was the same thing. You're looking around and saying, wow, this doesn't make sense. Why are we acting like this? Why do we behave the way we behave? And I've noticed that as I've begun to do more and more work in this space, a lot of it still, you know, we talked about the business rationale earlier, we talked about the intellectual case, and I keep saying, everybody says, yeah, there's a business case for this, and if you just understand the business case and can articulate that, everybody gets it. I'm saying, well, if it was that simple, everybody would be doing this. So there's still, there's an emotional side to this, there's an intellectual side, so it still has a lot to do with the heart and the head, and more than anything, I've been trying to just figure out why people act the way they act. What is it about our behaviors and all this stuff that we carry around in our heads that causes us to act the way we act? And we don't have time for me to go into all of the diversity deficiencies that I have and how I have treated people as I've matured and have learned things. So a lot of this still is about simply being aware, simply understanding how I'm acting, where my hot buttons are, how I'm interacting and connecting and not connecting to people, and I'm constantly working on those things.
Great, very good. I want to take off on this last area that you raised and have all of you just kind of chime in. So it'd be better if this is just a conversation rather than me calling on you. But I'm particularly interested in the plight of women of color, because in the way we talked about it this morning, Michael certainly made the point, and others have, that it's one thing to be disadvantaged as a white woman and feel all those death by 1,000 paper cuts. But for women of color, it's like 10 times harder. And I just want to know, what have you seen and what have you been able to do? Has your companies done anything specifically for that population, like made sure that you're treating that population uniquely and not just saying all women?